Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Eve History Show. I am Taladar, and before we get started, a bit of housekeeping news. First off, last week we had some issues with the text, so we're basically repeating the episode. Today's episode is going to be on the Alliance Tournament, so we'll get into that in just a little bit. The other thing is, some people were mentioning that they wanted audio versions of the show. I'm looking at figuring out how you set up audio versions of podcasts, but that's still to be determined. But if that ever happens, all these are going to be recorded audio locally, so we can then export them as audio broadcasts and podcasts and sort of stuff like that later on. But anyway, let me just turn up the music real quick. So anyway, today's episode of the Eve History Show is all about the Alliance Tournament. And the Alliance Tournament is a big thing that happens each year in EVE Online, and it's got a long history. It's been running since 2005, a little bit earlier if you count that AMR Championship one, but not really. So the best person I could find to help talk about this is a guy who's competed on at least 4 or 5 of the previous Alliance tournaments, dating back to AT8. He's also competed in New Eden Open, as well as the AMR Championship, and he was also a commentator for the AMR Championship this year at FanFest, and that is Suetonia, who competed for Hydra Reloaded, but currently he is now in Pandemic Legion. So Suetonia, thank you for coming by on the show and giving us a talk and helping provide your expert commentary and analysis on what the Alliance Tournament is and the history therein.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start off with what is the Alliance Tournament, because this is a thing people probably have heard about in EVE over the years, but may not know the specifics of what it's about, why people take it so seriously. So what is the Alliance Tournament?
So the Alliance Tournament is kind of like it's arena fight. It's changed. The rules have changed over the years, but generally a set amount of ships with certain point values enter into, like, 2 teams pick the ships, they enter into like a closed out arena, they fight, and whoever wins, whoever like destroys all the ships, or there's some rules as well if, like, you know, one side doesn't completely die, but that's where the point value stuff comes in. But generally, it's just like a fight in a closed off grid, and alliance. And it's typically alliances that compete, especially in the Alliance Tournament. Just, you know, like one alliance versus another alliance.
So yeah, the AT is basically EVE's own version of a battle arena, if you will, right? Like, you can compare it to something like World of Tanks, World of Warships, that sort of thing.
Yeah, or you could compare it, I guess, to kind of like a World of Warcraft arena or any kind of thing like that. Okay,
so let's talk about EVE's early history, and this is some stuff that not many people know about the Alliance Tournament, and that's, it wasn't always called the Alliance Tournament. It was actually called the Caldari Alliance Championships, and this actually started in December of 2005. So it's been going on for at least 11 years, but you know, there's been different variations of it. Sometimes there were multiple events in the year, that sort of thing. That's why we're on upcoming Alliance Tournament 14. And so the Alliance Tournament was a CCP ran event, but it didn't always have that video presence that you have now, and you kind of associate with video esports, you know, video game esports. There wasn't a Twitch TV back then. It was probably at best Justin.tv. And so the first Alliance Tournament actually was never broadcasted live as a video format. You actually had to listen to it on everadio.com, eve-radio.com, one of the longest running EVE fan sites out there. And to put it bluntly, Suetonia, would you agree that, like, the Alliance Tournament has grown as the rise of video gaming and online streaming has grown, and probably in some ways kind of like preceded that to a manner?
Yeah, I agree with that. I know Alliance Tournament 4 and 5, I believe, was broadcast by EVE TV, when EVE TV was an actual thing that you, like, I think you subscribed to it.
Yeah, EVE TV was actually a thing that came up around Alliance Tournament 3 is, I think, when they started doing it, maybe 4. And EVE TV, for those that don't know, wasn't always ran by CCP. CCP actually kind of bought/hired all the people from EVE TV to start doing things for them. And the Alliance Tournament was one of the things EVE TV was in charge of, and it would mostly be players running it and doing all the production work behind it each year. And they would go out to Iceland, they would do the production, and they would put it together. But nowadays, it's all ran by CCP, which is, you know, to CCP's credit, they put on a good product. But even back then, when Eve TV was just ran by the players, essentially, it still put on a very good product for what it was. So
yeah, I remember watching Alliance Tournament 4, and it was really good production quality.
yeah, and Alliance Tournament 4 was probably one of the first, maybe an AT4, I want to say maybe AT6, AT7 was when I first started watching the AT and passing curiosity, because my friends who had been playing Eve told me about it and said, hey, just watch this, it's pretty cool. So, with that said, you have early ATs, and let's talk about the early ATs, because there was a lot of different things happening at the time. In Eve, Band of Brothers were a huge, powerful group in 2005. They, going onward, they became this huge juggernaut. In fact, they dominated the early ATs. Can you tell us about like some of the early AT results and some of the people involved with that?
So, Band of Brothers, they won the first 3 Alliance tournaments: Alliance Tournament 1, Alliance Tournament 2, Alliance Tournament 3. And they are I believe they're the only Alliance, Pandemic Legion have also won 3 in a row. But Band of Brothers and Pandemic Legion are the only 2 alliances to win 3 Alliance tournaments in a row. And Pandemic Legion is the only alliance that's won more than more than any other one, other alliance.
Yeah, Band of Brothers won the first 3 Alliance tournaments, something that only Pandemic Legion has been able to match. Pandemic Legion, though, has won, if you count Alliance Tournament 13, though there's some controversy behind it, Pandemic Legion has won at least 5 tournaments. Band of Brothers still come in second with a very strong showing, with 3 Alliance tournaments under their belt, which is the second most Alliance tournaments anyone's ever won out of the whole history, dating back to 2005. And, you have a lot of those early tournaments, and you mentioned Alliance Tournament 4. What happened with Alliance Tournament 4? Because that was a big changing point in terms of who was winning and competing in the Alliance Tournament. There was a big upset that year.
Yeah, the Star Fraction actually knocked out Band of Brothers with 10-4 axes in a very famous match. I think you can probably still find it on YouTube. Unless it's been taken down.
I do know it's still up there. I wasn't able to get a copy of it, but there's actually CCP Falcon, before he was actually hired by CCP, was actually one of the early commentators for Alliance Tournament. The video you see on the screen right now is from Alliance Tournament. That's, I believe, 2, maybe 3. Probably 2. And there's actually, the video you're referring to is, you can actually, in the post-match, you see a lot of the shocked responses and the shocked reactions from the Eve TV team who were doing all the commentating, because everyone assumed Band of Brothers were just going to win the 4th tournament in a row and dominate. And they got defeated in the finals by Evoke, who, oh sorry, not Evoke, Hun Reloaded, who are a good team, and in the years that followed, they did a really good job over the course of the AT, but that was like their biggest crowning achievement that year, because they won the Alliance Tournament. But not only did they win it, they beat arguably the best team that in the 3 or 4 years that had ever been competing in the Alliance Tournament. So
yeah, I believe they defeated Evoke. At the time, this was only a single elimination tournament, so Star Faction knocked out Band of Brothers, but I mean, Evoke was still a strong team. I believe Pandemic Legion was in Alliance Tournament 4 as well, and they also placed very highly. I think they got knocked out in the quarterfinals.
And then we move on to the 5th Alliance Tournament. Evoke won. They're still a well-known name. Alliance Tournament 6 rolls around. Pandemic Legion win their first Alliance Tournament, which was well before the next topic of discussion, which was the introduction of the tournament ships. So let's talk about the tournament ships, because those came in right around the midlife point of the Alliance Tournament. What are the tournament ships? Why were they introduced? And in your opinion, what sort of effect did they have on the overall interest in the Alliance Tournament from that point on?
So CCP have always, in previous tournaments, they've actually given away ships in some of the tournaments. I believe they gave away the Raven State issues, and also the Tribal Tempests, and also I believe the Imperial Apoc that Tyrex Torok famously lost, as well as the Imperial Navy Geddons. But for Alliance Tournament 6, CCP sort of went with a different prize structure, which I think was really healthy. They started giving away 50 unique cruisers to the first place team and 50 unique frigates to the second place team. I think it's really good that they increased the number of prizes to 50, because like the previous ships, they basically just stayed in a hangar, and like Alliance Tournament teams at that point required like 12 people on a side, on top of maybe 10 people that are helping you test and like doing theory crafting and stuff. So it was a lot better to like just be able to reward like everyone from your team with those ships.
Yeah, so the seventh tournament was introduced, brought in those tournament ships, and the first tournament ships ever introduced in the Alliance tournament in terms of like a prize payout for first and second place were the Freki and the Mimir, and they're two ships that have, well, the Mimir more so than anything actually will play a role later on, because Pandemic Legion in AT8 had a bit of an interesting event go on. AT8 rolled around, Pandemic Legion won again. They won 6, 7, and 8, which were the 3 in the row they won. But Alliance Tournament 8, something happened at the end of that led into Alliance Tournament 9, which created one of the probably the best rivalries in the Alliance Tournament's history. And you actually are like one of the first people to be involved with that, or not the first people to be involved, but one of the people who were involved with it. Let's talk about that. What happened with Alliance Tournament 8 going into Alliance Tournament 9 that led to your involvement with the Alliance Tournament?
Well, it's kind of more at the end of Alliance Tournament 7. So Gobbins is a pretty good guy. He was one of the key players on the Pandemic Legion team that won the 6th and the 7th Alliance Tournament. And there was some drama involving him and his departure. He had an argument with Shamus or something. I'm not sure what the entire details are, but Pandemic Legion, Gobbins temporarily left Pandemic Legion, and we were flying with Gobbins in Providence, like helping CVA versus the Southern Coalition. We were like small gang PvPers. Gobbins used to do bombing runs there, so we got along very well. And come Alliance Tournament 8, Gobbins still had not returned to Pandemic Legion, and he basically just managed our team. We entered into the Alliance Tournament under Hydra Reloaded with Gobbins and Exceed Inc. And it was mostly Genius' idea from Hydra Reloaded, and together we worked together, and we were able to take second place in Alliance Tournament 8.
Yeah, and so Alliance Tournament 8 was the introduction of Hydra Reloaded, and as you mentioned, and as I mentioned, there was a bit of a rivalry at that point, because Alliance Tournament 8 was, Hydra kind of were a brand new team. They essentially had no interest, or no one really expected them to do that well that year, in terms of just the overall pool of people competing and the talent roster that were involved. No one really expected Hydra to do so well in such a short amount of time. Maybe in Alliance Tournament 9 they could have placed ninth, and that would have been a little bit more reasonable of an assumption to make at the time. But then Alliance Tournament 9 comes around, and there was a huge upset, because this was the year people were expecting, Pandemic Legion are going to come out, they're going to win the 4th one, they're going to beat Bob's record, they're going to be, another dominant force. But what happened with Alliance Tournament 9 and Hydra Reloaded and Pandemic Legion's relationship at that point?
Okay, so in Alliance Tournament 9, one thing that was actually really interesting is we have to kind of go back to 88 for a bit of history first. While we were testing a character named Rivy, who is actually now CCP Fozzy, the developer we all know and love, spied on us. He actually successfully looked at almost all of our practices, and he determined that we were flying a certain setup wrong against a rush setup, and he really contributed to Pandemic Legion winning the 8th Alliance Tournament. I still think they probably would have won even if he didn't spy on us, but because of how effective his spying was, in Alliance Tournament 9, we decided to practice exclusively in wormholes, and we also had an exclusive training partner in Outbreak, who were very close allies to us because a previous Alliance director, Duncan Tanner, had left Outbreak to join Genos, which was the main corporation in Hydra Reloaded, and we had very close ties to them. And Outbreak were a very strong sort of small roaming gang alliance, kind of like our alliance. So we worked together I think we were working together to fight people in Curse and Providence at the time. But anyway, where this kind of comes relevant is both Hydra Reloaded and Outbreak actually made it to the finals together, and in a controversy, Outbreak actually threw the match to us in the final because they felt like we deserved it, because Hydra Reloaded itself had done most of the like theory crafting, the spying, the logistics work, so they felt like they owed us the win. so they like threw the match, and this obviously caused a lot of people to get really mad about it because, especially CCP at the time, because they had a lot of big name sponsors like Nvidia, and I can't remember the other one, but they had like some really high profile sponsors, and I don't think it went over too well.
Yeah, so which one was that? That was AT10 was the controversy. Or sorry, AT9 or was it AT10?
89 is well, we got banned from playing in AT10 because
That's
of the
right.
previous result, essentially.
AT9 was where the controversy of match fixing came into play, and that actually played a bit of a role in last year's AT and AT13. We'll get to in that a little bit. But Hydra and Outbreak basically played the system, if you will, to be a little bit forgiving to the Hydra stuff. You could call them cheating, whatever you want, but let's just call it played the system, played the metagame, if you will, and that caused drama. That was actually stuff that was reported on massively.com, which was, it's now a defunct website, but it was talking about EVE a lot back then. I think the article's still up on Engadget, which was their parent company, that talks about like the controversy of match fixing in an esport. And when you talk about other esports, match fixing is a big problem, right? Like there's match fixing issues with Dota 2, StarCraft 2 has a lot of controversies around that. So it wasn't too surprising that, the controversy from AT9 led into a big rule change for AT10. Do you want to talk about what that rule change was?
Well, I'm not sure entirely if it was in AT10, but CCP started enforcing sort of a no collusion rule, where like any teams that did not as they felt they didn't feel like the teams were competing, they would disqualify them. Because in the 89 as well, that they were still using a group stage method at the time. So there was a few other matches as well that a lot of people were disappointed about. Like there was, I believe, a match between Circle of Two and another Serbian alliance. And of course, Circle of Two are Serbian as well, and they like deliberately gamed it so like one of them would get 98 points, and then the other guys would win with 100 points. So, like they would give the best chances of like the other team going second by taking a loss, so they would both get through, like things like that.
And obviously CCP over the years have taken a bit of an offense to that because, again, while EVE has, like, you mentioned the spying on other teams and their practice comps, that's kind of permitted because it's kind of the metagame. But the match fixing and in-game and in-match collusion is a big issue that they don't want to allow. So AT, 10 happens, Virgin Collapse ends up winning it all. Pandemic Legion's family. They were barred from actually competing in AT10 because I remember because I was a part of the Waffles team at the time. And so AT11 happens. Things get kind of loosened up by CCP. They're not as strict anymore, and so you see other people compete. PL end up winning AT11. Then AT12 rolls around, and Hydra kind of come back in a way. Why don't we talk about what Hydra were doing as part of AT12 that led into AT13, which was more of the bigger controversy in AT13 than AT12.
So for the 11th Alliance tournament, we actually ended up coming second. We lost to Pandemic Legion in the finals, but with the third place team actually, which was Exodus, we were actually really close to a lot of the
team than AT12.
So for the 11th Alliance tournament, we actually ended up coming second. We lost to Pandemic Legion in the finals, but with the third place team actually, which was Exodus, we were actually really close to a lot of the corps in there, mainly Turn Left and Mining Excel, Mining Foundation. It's something like that. I know the name is like MIEF. But we were really close to those corps, and during Alliance Tournament 11, we actually had a lot of trouble like doing full tests. And with CCP relaxing the rules and us clarifying a lot of things with them, we decided to find like a mutual training partner, and we actually came first and second with the Camel Empire, and we were Warlords of the Deep in the New Eden Open, the second New Eden Open. So we had practiced with them. We knew that they were a great fit, and we were like great friends. We were basically like the same kind. We like fit really well. We trained really well. We both had the same mindset. So going into Alliance Tournament 12, we actually trained exclusively with the Camel Empire in a wormhole together. And even though we actually, I think we came eighth place in the Lions Tournament 12, we did pretty good. The Camel Empire, who we trained exclusive with, actually won that tournament, and they decided to share a few of the prizes with us as well because a lot of the players in our alliance had contributed a lot to like logistics and to theory crafting, and the spy work was done almost exclusively by us. So they decided to give a few of their prize ships, and which was perfectly legal.
Yeah, at the time, sharing prize ships, sharing logistics, having exclusive training partners by CCP standards were perfectly permitted. The only rules CCP had ever really kind of came out and said hardline you were not allowed to do was any match fixing, any predetermination of what an end result of a match would be between captains. So 1812 happens. There was a bit of an outcry about, well, Hydra has two teams, that's kind of unfair, that sort of thing. But for the most part, it was basically let to have, played out as it did, and kudos to Camel Empire. They ended up winning the whole shebang, and they got some very nice ships, and I believe it was that year, that was the Whiptail and Chameleon, which were very cool Garista ships. The year before that, PL won the Kramos and Morocco, which are also very cool ships. But the Whiptail and the Chameleon were very interesting because Garistas, at least in my opinion. Anyway, so then 1813 rolls around, and Hydra, let's call them a Hydra as the plural term for both Camel Empire and Warlords of the Deep, because essentially they kind of were. They tried doing the same thing again, only this time around, and I don't remember if it was the quarterfinals or the semifinals specifically. But I remember it was before the finals itself. The captains of both Hydra and, or not both Hydra, but of both Camel and Warlords basically determined that one side would take the loss to give them a bit more time to prep for their next match because of the way the schedule was working out. What happened there, and can you elaborate a little bit on like what you know about that?
Right, so I didn't actually know anything about that. I think the only people who knew were DHP Wildcat, who was the person who whistle blew the whole thing, a Kadesh Priestess, and who was the captain of the Warlords team, and Bob Shafter, which is the captain of the Camel Empire team, and they basically conspired together to I think throw a match or make it so the match was predetermined, and so that they could focus all of the time to practice for the match versus the Tuskers. And the Tuskers are actually a very strong team. They're actually the team that won the Even T Glide tournament, as well as the preseason before that.
So that occurred. No one really knew that had happened until, like you mentioned, DHB Wildcat posted an accusatory post on EVE Online's official forums about how there was match collusion. CCP did their investigation. It was the second time Hydra players were accused of match fixing. They had been involved in match fixing dating back to that previous event with Outbreak. And then CCP's investigation came back and determined that there was match fixing involved, and that Hydra, we'll just call them Hydra. Hydra, who took first and second place in AT13, were disqualified, meaning they dropped down to the very bottom of the thing, moving everyone up, and lo and behold, the person who came in third place was their chief rival, Pandemic Legion. And at that point, things were very interesting because Kadesh Priestess, who you had mentioned, was involved with it, posted a very long post, not on the official E forums, but on another forum called Fail Heap Challenge, where a lot of people post about the tournament, solo PvP, low sec stuff, that sort of thing. They basically admitted to it, as well as like giving their excuse as to why they did it. And one of the reasons that kind of stuck out was they did it because they assumed that PL were also going to be doing it, and they wanted to beat PL before PL could beat them. And it's a bit of a tricky situation, if you will, because that's such a very odd thing to take into account and into assumption when you yourself are cheating, in a sense, because, I mean, by the rules they were. What are your thoughts on CCP's punishment for that? Kadesh Priestess got a permanent ban from EVE. CCP-sponsored EVE tournaments. Bob Shaftos, for his involvement, got banned for 1 year. But other than that, no one really got adversely affected other than the guys who had been on their teams, had their ships, assumed to have been won, fairly taken away from them. How do you feel that was in terms of CCP's reaction and their sort of response to that behavior?
I think it was it was fair, to be honest. Like, they did what they needed to do. They didn't screw over like the actual players on the teams. They only screwed over the people who conspired to do that. And DHB Wildcat knew that a lot of the players weren't involved. Like, he actually posted on the forums as well to say like Chester and me weren't involved because a lot of people were giving us shit for it.
Yeah, you were made a mockery of. I won't deny. I actually was one of the people kind of like jokingly saying you were involved. So was Chester. I won't deny. I jokingly said these things. And Chester was also one of the commentators, and that was added to a bit of the controversy because Hydra were looking to, in a sense, usurp Pandemic Legion as like this powerhouse of a group in the AT, and then it all came crashing down for them. What do you think their future as a team is going to be? I mean, I know you left to join Pandemic Legion now. I don't think you're too involved with the Alliance Tournament prep stuff. What do you think that Hydra's future in the Alliance Tournament stuff is going to be like? Or do you think essentially it's kind of fizzled out because of these issues?
Well, it's mostly fizzled out. Like Kadesh Priestess, for example, he actually gave everyone who was awarded a prize ship for AT-13, who got it taken away back from CCP. A lot of the Hydra people who were involved in that, they all got Chromoises or, like old like prize ships that we had, like sort of in the cache for like the AT. Like, we gave away everything that we had. Well, I mean, like everything that Hydra had was given away to players, so that no one really got screwed over on the Hydra side from the Hydra Grunt's perspective. But I don't think there'll be a future for Hydra Reloaded. I think a lot of people are burnt out, and like from the leadership side, and like Kadesh's band, who was probably one of the biggest contributors. Like, it was insane how much work he put into it. He actually put in, I think, around 100 hours per week. Like, he would like log in like 7 a.m. and like log out like 2 a.m.
Yeah, and so now that we're talking about what it's like to compete and what it's like to be involved with the tournament, you as a competitor, what can you explain what the process of competing in the Alliance Tournament is like? Because this is something that not everyone in EVE gets to partake in. I know, for example, Pandemic Legion, they're fairly selective with their people who they compete for obvious reasons. They want to win, they want to bring out the best of the best, that sort of thing. Not every alliance does that. Some alliances kind of just throw people together, like Pandemic Horde did, as well as other groups. What is it like to compete in the Alliance Tournament? I mean, you've competed, I would imagine, almost in as many, if not more, tournaments than most people that have ever competed in the Alliance Tournament.
Oh, it's just a ton of fun. I mean, it depends on what kind of team you want to be on as well. One thing that I think we actually skipped talking about, is that CCP changed the prize structure for Alliance Tournament 12. They made it a lot more friendly towards people who weren't like the cream of the crop. Like before AT-12, the early prizes were essentially first place and second place, getting 50 cruisers and 50 figures respectively. Before AT-12, CCP actually changed the prize structure a lot. They changed it so that the prize ships themselves were trickled down from first to fourth. And also, every match that was won, every team would get a 10-run skin copy of a pirate faction. For the Alliance of 12, it was the Rattlesnake Victory Edition, and for AT-13, it was the Sancha Victory skin, which applies to all the Sancha ships. So they made it a lot more even if you want to just get a group of friends together and have a few beers and a few laughs, and maybe you'll win a game and you'll win a few skins or whatever. And for like the teams that are kind of competitive, there are a lot of teams that are really strong that haven't actually won a lot of prize ships. For example, like the Tuskers and Exodus. The Ronin is another traditionally really strong team. Nully Secunda. Previously Hum Reloaded. So there's been a lot of teams that were not quite on the same level as Pandemic Legion or Hydra Reloaded that really deserve to win some stuff. And I think the change really opened it up to a lot of different people.
Right, the prize structure is a big deal. So from a competitor standpoint and from a participant, what is it like? Because, you kind of hear like these rumors that like, oh, it's like 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, that sort of thing. Is that what it's like for the most part on average, or is it more? It's very dependent on whose group you're flying with, like you mentioned.
I think it depends entirely on whose group you're flying with. For example, with Hydra Reloaded, we were doing practices initially 3 times a week, then it grew to 4 times a week, like 2 weeks before the tournament. Then those were like 4-hour sessions. So like the average grunt was generally putting in about 12 to 15 hours a week. And like some like more hardcore people involved in theory crafting or leadership, like Kadesh Priestess, for example, could easily be putting like 50 hours plus per week. And like, but you can join a team like Test Alliance. Please ignore. They're actually a pretty successful tournament team. In fact, like I know it seems like a lot of people really disrespect them, but they've actually placed top 16 in the past 3 Alliance tournaments, and they actually run they're kind of different to PL and Hydra in that they actually just have public testing. Like if you go to SSU, I think it's like 2 jumps from the public testing system on Singularity. Like tests just run like a weekly like 80 practice, where anyone can just come and fight them. So you can be on the test team and you can maybe put in 4 hours a week and you can still fly with them. And of course if you can just like you can just not practice and compete and just have a laugh, like a lot of people actually do that. And you see like paladins like MJDing out of the arena from the games that they've already won to part of those teams. But I think it heavily depends on what kind of group and what kind of how much effort you want to put into it as a group.
And you mentioned the kind of the practices and stuff. Let's talk about that, because over the years CCP have changed up how they do those sort of things. Last year they usually actually for a while let you practice on Singularity, and Singularity is basically a mirror of Tranquility. It's got a little bit more finicky stuff going on because they're always testing out new mechanics that are due in the next patch, that sort of thing. But then you also had things like Duality. Why don't you talk about, and can you explain the difference between the Duality test server and the Singularity test server as a Alliance Tournament competitor?
So Singularity is open to everyone, but there's no privacy there. And so Pandemic Legion, especially in Alliance Tournament 8, as we talked about, CCP Fozzy, who was Rivy at the time, had successfully spied on us and watched almost all of our practices. Going forward from there, we actually devoted ourselves to testing in wormholes exclusively, and we also had very secure security. Like we would literally have during testing, we would have we'd have someone multi-boxing 4 orcas sitting on the wormhole to instantly collapse it if there was probes or someone appeared on the other side, and that's a lot of work. And of course, Pandemic Legion put in a lot of effort into spying on people. So the implications basically is if you test on Singularity, a lot of the teams are putting in a lot of effort, like Pandemic Legion and Hydra Reloaded are probably watching your tests. And Duality is a lot different. It's password protected. At the time when they gave us Duality, it was password protected. So you could just test in peace, or if you wanted to scrim with another team, you just give them your system password and let them in, and then they'd fight against you, and then you change it after they left. So it gave you a lot more privacy.
And to sort of round out our discussion before we enter the questions and answer section with the chat, overall, the Alliance Tournament history, and from what you've experienced and what you've seen, how do you feel it compares to some of the other competitive sports out there in video games? You have other professional esports stuff. Obviously, the AT is very different because it's kind of a mishmash between an MMO style thing where you have actual in-game assets that can be lost, like your tourney ships, that sort of stuff. But it tries to be a bit different and kind of is a step to the side of the main events going on in EVE at the time. How do you feel that compares to other stuff that goes on in terms of esports and things like that?
Oh, it's quite similar in a few ways, I guess. I think the amount of effort that the successful teams put in is very similar to successful teams in other esports. We actually had a former Counter-Strike, a guy who actually played in a lot of Counter-Strike pro matches on the Camel Empire side, and he was actually complaining about how much work we were doing for the Alliance tournament. As someone who previously used to train with a pro team 3 days a week.
All right, so with that, we'll open up the chat for questions and answers. If you have any questions or want to bring up a specific topic you'd like to hear Satonia talk about with regards to the Alliance Tournament, as well as let's talk about some of the history stuff, just shoot it into the Twitch chat, and we will get started with that. But in the meantime, Suetonia, what do you feel that potentially, because the rules and stuff for AT4 haven't been announced yet, how do you feel that CCP are going to change some of the stuff that happened in AT13 to address them in AT14 and going forward?
I actually think AT13 was a much better rule set than AT12 with the the named the early Tech 1 drones only, and like dams having to have no scripts and no scripts on TDs, because it removed a lot of the counter stuff, like card counter stuff, and it removed a lot of the rock paper scissors stuff, and it also like a lot of matches were won or lost like in the first 5 seconds of the match when there's like tons of dams on each side. So it's like whoever has like the best connection to the server wins in some cases. Well, not all the time, but you know what I mean. Like it felt very with dams as powerful as they are in the AT. It was I think it's great that CCP like made them unscripted.
And how do you feel about the events in AT13? Obviously, you weren't directly involved, but you were kind of tangentially, affected by them. With Hydra and the Warlords, the Camel Empire thing, do you think CCP are going to make a big step forward to address that issue between 13 and 14, or do you think the rule was fine in place? CCP just need to be a little bit more proactive in preventing that sort of event from occurring?
Oh no, I think it's fine. Like I think as long as CCP investigate appropriately like they did in AT13, then I don't see a problem. Like I think like teams should be allowed to scrim against each other. Like it improves the quality of the matches when a lot more teams are better and they don't have their like setup spied on.
And with that, do you think that, again, do you feel that CCP, because people were mentioning it last year, with the prize ships, the tournament prize ships being involved, that they should be adjusted to have different point value than what a cruiser would have or what a frigate would have if it's a prize ship. Do you think that should be implemented to make the matches a little bit more competitive when it comes to people who are carrying a fair amount of prize ships, like Pandemic Legion, Hydra, those sort of people, to make it a little bit easier on the guys that they're facing?
Yeah, this is actually a really tough subject. I think the benefit of making Alliance Tournament ships, the prize ships in the actual tournaments, like for example in AT13, we actually had the match between the Hydra, Camel Empire, and Pandemic Legion in the finals, like all three of them fighting. There was actually more Is destroyed in that fight than in Asakai, like in the matches between those teams, because I think like 6 prize ships were destroyed and 2 flagships. So I think that's really interesting, like an interesting aspect to it. But I understand from a competitive point of view, especially for I guess teams that are good that haven't won prize ships. Like for example, I think most like serious teams probably have means to acquire them, like they have enough ISK to purchase them. And I think the dangerous side of doing a point only setup is that like you don't see a lot of the AT prize ships anyway. Like the only ones you really see are the ones that are really overpowered for their point cost and role. Like the Malice, Atana, and Cambion were kind of the big 3, and to a lesser extent Chromoas and Maracas in the previous tournament. Like a lot of the old ones are not very valuable, like the Mimir and the Utu, for example, you're probably almost never going to see. So if you increase the price cost of them, then you're absolutely never ever going to see them. And like, I think if you like individually like place the ships, then they're just probably to the point where they're balanced, then you're also never going to see them. The only one that I think maybe deserves to be banned is the Atana, because it allows you to do a Tinker setup but with like 71km reps. So I don't know, I see merits for both sides. One idea that I really like is in the ban system, giving like each team like 1 unique ban, because then that way it doesn't really like raise the bar for the lower tier teams. Like like if you give like each team like another ban that's universal that you can apply to everything, then it hurts a lot of the weaker teams, because that means they have to have more setups, they have to have more ban replacements. But if you make it unique only, it's like a ban that that only really applies to teams that have uniques. So it doesn't really raise the bar for setups too much.
We have a question from Crazy Dog asking, when you practice for the AT, how do you set up an arena? Will you just use a large bubble or something like that to illustrate where the arena boundaries are, or how do you set that sort of thing up?
We set it up for our arena, for example. We just set it up in a safe spot. We have a can at the center, and then we have like the MJDs in the appropriate locations. The micro jump field units are in the arena, and then we just normally have like a referee or someone watching at 0, and like everyone else has like, you can just like put a mobile tractor unit at the center, and everyone can just add that to the overview, and you just trust people when they're practicing. Like they mention when they go out the arena, or you have the referee that's watching people go out the arena, and you just pay attention to it. That's how we did it anyway. But you can also petition CCP for the past 3. I think past 3 tournaments, you've been able to petition like CCP Fozzy or another person, and they can just set up the arena for you in the system. Of course, that does mean that other people can very easily watch it.
And you mentioned the mobile jump drive units that were actually part of the arena, and that was actually a kind of recent introduction into the tournament system. Why don't you kind of like explain that? Because CCP have changed how the arena's laid out, some of the rules with that. Like, what are these mobile jump drive units that are just hanging out in the arena?
So there's 9 total. There's 1 in the center itself, and then there's another 8 that are, I think, is 70 or 75 kilometers from the arena, that make up a cube that align with all of the beacons that warp in. When you get moved to the system, you're told to pick a beacon between A to D, and all of those beacons are, I think they're like 60 degrees from each other. I'm not sure how to like visually explain it, but there's different angles on the beacons, so like teams can like arrive like as close as 50 kilometers from each other if they warp max range from the same beacon, or they can like land as close as like as far away as 100 kilometers with the same like 50-kilometer warp.
And yeah, so they were added in, and it kind of presented an interesting foil into how people would fly their ships, because do you want to use the beacon? Well, if you're too close to the edge, you misangle it, or someone bumps you, you can actually be thrown out of the arena, thus killing you. And so that sort of thing is kind of an interesting way of doing things. And of course, CCP have introduced the new command destroyers, which basically do the same thing, only it's anything within a 6-kilometer radius. But of course, there's no rules announced for ET-14, which would be the first tournament that those ships are part of. So we don't know how those are going to play out. Like if they'll do what EVE-NT did for their tournament, where they basically said you can use the ship, you just can't use that module. That's likely what CCP is going to be doing, but who knows? Maybe they won't, because it is CCP and they like to throw crazy curveballs at us every now and then. But I think that basically does it for this episode on the history of the Alliance tournament. Suetonia, thank you very much for stopping by.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And of course, you can always catch us on EVE-NT TV, it's twitch.tv/eve_NT_TV. You can hit the follow button if you're watching it live on Twitch right now. But we actually do have a quick question before we go. And that is, do you think that fighting should start upon arrival into the arena, so faster warping ships would have an advantage?
I don't think that should be the case, and also usually you fleet warp yourself to the arena, so you normally share the same warp. Like you could share the same warp anyway.
So there you go. And also, of course, CCP do a countdown. They get you set up in place, wait for the commercial break to end, then they do a countdown, and then the match actually starts. So that sort of thing doesn't really actually happen. But anyway, thank you very much for you guys. Thank you very much, you guys, for watching. Like I said, you can hit the follow button on twitch.tv. You can also go follow us on twitch.tv/eve_NT_TV. You can also follow us on our YouTube channel, which is where these VODs will go to. And next week, we should have Tyrax Thork from the Guiding Hand Social Club heist from way back when on to talk about that. But of course, these things are always subject to change. Just keep an eye out on twitter.com/@Taladar or /Taladar for any announcements I'll make about that. And with that, that is it for this week. Don't forget, this weekend we also have the Valkyrie tournament, NA versus EU. That's going to be pretty interesting. It's probably going to be the first RAN player-made tournament for Valkyrie, which is pretty cool. And I do know that we were talking to CCP, trying to maybe get them to give us a little bit more tools that like we do for Eve NT Collides. You know, so we can run our own tournaments for Valkyrie, though that's still up in the air. And also, you can check out our Twitch channel, our YouTube channel. What else did I mention? Oh, you can follow us on Twitter. I forget our Twitter thing. Maybe Suetonia knows this.
The EVNT Twitter handle?
Yeah, I don't remember what it is. It's a very weird name.
I believe it's Eve_NT_HQ.
I don't think there's a second underscore. I think it's just Eve_NTHQ, but we'll double check that. I'll put that onto the thing to mention next week. Also, if you guys want to check out the Jeff Rader show, that's every Thursday before this show. There's also General Stargazer's live Twitch showing of Eve Valkyrie. He plays that pretty much every day. It's pretty amazing. He plays that game so much. But yeah, thank you very, very much for watching. We will see you next time, and I hope you fly safe, and that is it for this week. See you next week, guys.